Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Becky Page, Director of HR Services. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for our webinar, Beyond Midyear, How High-Performing Teams Run Reviews Year-Round. We really do appreciate you being here, and we're excited to share today's discussion with you. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Satish Kumar. Satish leads our PerformSpark product strategy and innovation efforts, guiding the development of solutions that help organizations strengthen performance management, employee development, and business success. With a strong focus on translating market insights and HR best practices into practical technology solutions, Satish is passionate about creating tools that are scalable, intuitive, and aligned with the way people work today. So in today's presentation, he's going to lead our discussion and the product demonstration, sharing how PerformSpark modernizes performance management to drive both employees and business growth. So having introduced him, let's get started. And Satish, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Becky. So just to reintroduce, I am Satish Kumar. I do run PerformSpark here, the performance module of Trainery HCM that encompasses both learning, compensation, as well as performance solutions. So here's the deal for the next 45 minutes. I'm not going to tell you that, annual reviews are broken. You already all know that, and it's why you've signed up. So what I'm trying to do here is give some specific structural failures that most HR teams may not see or struggle to fix, and a model that perhaps maybe tries to fix them. So we'll have a few polls, a quick demo, and time for Q&A at the end. So this is where we're going. Why more reviews reflex is typically a wrong fix. What decision-driven reviews actually look like in practice, the fairness problem nobody talks about, and a live look at PerformSpark and a quick Q&A at the end. To get us started, we'll do a quick poll. How does your organization primarily run performance reviews today? We'll give a, few seconds or a minute for folks to respond to that. Great. Looks like we just wrapped up this poll, and it's a little bit of everything. So one thing we've noticed, or in our research, is 70% of companies do run annual or mid-year reviews, annual plus mid-year, and that pretty much tracks with the market. Here's what's interesting though about that is the companies that switched to quarterly check-ins around 10 years ago, the major enterprises, household names such as Adobe. Deloitte, GE, most of them have, quietly added structure back in. That's because, pure continuous performance management didn't work either. The answer isn't exactly to me more or fewer reviews. It's different reviews, and we'll get into that. We've noticed that quarterly check-ins has ticked up in the last several years, but the honest question I have for that group is, are your check-ins driving decisions, or are you having status meetings labeled as performance? Many times because of that latter portion, you're really just added, a lot of administrative overhead to your HR teams without maybe adding signal or, prescriptive next steps. Folks that are in column option D, we can see here different reviews for different situations. I'd like to think that you guys are the most mature group on the call. So the next, few minutes that we'll be discussing these things should give you, some ammunition for your executive team. So moving on here, I'm going to, as I said before, skip the annual reviews or broken speech. But what I want to do instead is name the specific structural failure that I think that many people don't talk about. The review cycle is a single output system, and it's trying to make multi-output decisions. So what does that mean? Look what you ask an annual review to do. set compensation, justify promotions, document underperformance, identify development needs, surface succession candidates, calibrate fairness in compensation and in performance conversations. These are 6 to 8 fundamentally different decisions, and they're all jammed into one form filled out, the night before the meeting. Colloquially, I was taking a flight yesterday, and there was a partner of an architectural firm sitting to the left of me, and she was filling out 10 reviews all at once on the plane. And this is how many times they're done. And this is why managers, we all know, hate it. This is why many employees walk out confused. We've seen a significant amount of data where there is that discrepancy between how managers are feeling about, for example, things about their career progression and AI and the role of their work, and compared to how employees feel about that. This is why, HR can struggle to get a clean answer to who's our top talent. You're many times HR is, using one instrument to measure 6 to 8 different components. These figures that you see at the bottom from Gartner, Gallup, Sherman, Deloitte, these aren't telling you that reviews are bad. They're telling you that you're using the wrong tool for 5 or 6 jobs. That's the real problem. So decision-driven reviews flips the question. Instead of what's our review cycle, should be asking what decision am I trying to make and what review type matches it. So here's the thing that I feel like many folks might be missing. You're already running a lot of reviews informally. Your managers are already having promotion conversations in March, for example. Good managers are already checking in on new hires at 30 days. HRBPs are pulling people aside for quick chats when they feel like performance is slipping or hearing context from the managers on the front line. What you don't have many times is structure around it. So the conversations happen, but the evidence doesn't get captured and the outcomes don't get tracked. So when comp season hits and other stakeholders are involved, whether you are owned by private equity or venture capital or some institutional investors, you're going back to relying on memory when other stakeholders like finance and benefits and comp teams get involved. So decision-driven reviews aren't more work. They're formalizing work your good managers are already doing and making it accessible to average managers, which is most of them. So let's walk through the table. Annual covers overall performance. Is there Wi-Fi issue? No, okay. So yes, going back to yeah, annual covers annual performance. Your onboarding handles new higher risk at your 30-day, 60-day, 90-day marks. 360 reviews surface multi-stakeholder views that you need for promotion. Check-ins and PIPs handle slipping performance in real time. Calibration overarchingly handles fairness. 9box and talent grids handle succession. 6 instruments, 6 jobs. That's an example of a model. So we're going to move here to a second poll, which is which review moment is hardest for your organization to handle and manage consistently? Great. So we see folks pretty split between 40% at option A and primarily option D. So it's pretty interesting because sometimes in option A, the basics are hard when there's no scaffolding underneath, which we'll also discuss, and option D, calibration. And this is really where legal and equity exposure lives. And we do need to spend time in your organization on this. This is because as you scale, these issues can really compound if there's no structure or a method to the madness. This is a slide I like folks to really remember here. There's 3 bands. Let's look at the structure. So in the top band, you have your fixed cycles, the only 2 reviews that belong on a calendar. Mid-year, typically June, July. Annual, typically starting in November, sometimes goes into January of the following year. And calibration sits right next to each one because calibration is a consequence of formal reviews, not a floating event. Um, People, I think, get this wrong constantly. They run calibration twice a year on its own schedule and many times wonder why managers can't remember context or things get, in context gets muddled. In the middle band, you'll see continuous, manager one-on-ones, monthly, every month. Sometimes some organizations, more frontier tech-oriented organizations, for example, have it every week. This is the most underrated investment in performance management because companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on review software and skip the $0 intervention of structured monthly one-on-ones. If you do nothing else this year, mandate them and give your managers a template. In the bottom band, these are event triggered. Onboarding fires by hire date, not calendar. 360s fire by promotion considerations to select folks, and PIPs as well for performance signals when it's required. IDPs fire post review when development needs surface, or in general, just to continually improve your reportees. And here's the punchline. So these two reviews follow the calendar, and the rest follow the business. This is kind of the shift we're going for. Once you organize performance management around decisions and triggers instead of calendar dates, the whole system gets simpler, not more complex. Because most of these reviews are already happening informally, you're just getting structure and additional context. The objection many times forming in your head is we can barely get managers to do annual reviews. You want us to run 8 review types? No. And actually, this is where I'm going to push back on a common piece of advice. Most consultants will tell you how to fix your annual review first, then add other review types. I think that's backwards. If your annual review is broken, fixing it in isolation won't work. The problem with the annual review itself is that you're trying to make it do 6 jobs. Add onboarding reviews first, especially for frontline workforces. They're high ROI, low political risk, and they teach managers already some muscle of structured review conversations without the stakes of compensation attached. Onboarding is a wedge of sorts. Annual is the boulder. You don't start with the boulder. So phase one, stabilize annual and add structured onboarding. Phase two, then add 360 feedbacks, IDPs, structured one-on-ones, and PIPs. Phase three, connect AI, calibration workflows, as well as learning and compensation into either one platform like we like to do, or we really try to sell, or there are several tools that exist in the market that allow you to pull context and allow HR leaders to work independently, whatever tool they use in their flow of work. The architectural principle that makes this work is we have to standardize the building blocks and then centralize the evidence. Here's why this matters. The biggest failure mode of decision-driven reviews isn't too many reviews. It's inconsistency in those reviews. So if your 360 for engineering looks like nothing from 360 for sales, if your onboarding review for your New York office is different from the one in Austin, you have a fragmentation that calibration can't fix, right? You have to compare apples to apples. Standardize these components with templates, competencies, rating scales, workflows, and then you can vary the use case. So centralizing the evidence, so feedback from a check-in in February, so shows up in an annual review in November. When these bones and building blocks are consistent, the conversations can be far more flexible, which is why we are starting using the term structured flexibility. Over here, I want to be specific about what changes when reviews are evidence-based and instead of memory-based. Memory-based review captures roughly 4 to 6 weeks of performance. Everything before that gets compressed or forgotten. There's ample research on recency bias and performance reviews, and it's rather consistent. The back third of the review period, that dominates the rating. So an evidence-based review captures the actual year, goals that are tracked monthly, notes from one-on-ones, private notes or shared notes, feedback from tiers and from peers, and kudos and recognition on quick and small wins, IDP progress, as well as prior reviews. So you can still have the same 5-point rating scale or 4-point rating scale, the same hour-long conversation that happens when reviews are finalized and delivered to the manager to convey these to the employee. but there's a completely different signal to noise ratio. And the most important part, the employee can see this. The number one complaint about reviews from employees isn't exactly, I got a bad rating or this didn't it's, I don't think this reflected my actual year. So evidence-based reviews fix that. And there's a lot of network effects that draw from this too, right? When employees feel like there is a lot more context provided, that can really assuage some attrition concerns and being able to interdict before things, and when you start getting critical gaps across key roles. We'll skip this slide because it bridges rather too close to our demo. But I want to spend a couple minutes here on AI because the audience and the market, between the intellectualia and the academic component versus on the ground HR leaders, the question is really split. Half of you are excited about AI in reviews and half are nervous. Both reactions I think are correct, but for different reasons. What AI right now does well, especially in a very critical and compliant heavy role like HR, is synthesis. It can take evidence, goals, notes, feedback, kudos, and turn that into a draft narrative that managers can edit. It can save prep time. It can surface patterns a human reviewer will miss across 50 managers or 500 employees. But what AI does badly as it currently stands, and what it shouldn't do, is make the decision on people. Every rating, every comp decision, every promotion call should stay human. That's not really a marketing line. That should be a design principle. So the AI in PerformSpark doesn't generate ratings. It tries to generate context and pull context. Here's the test that I'd put to any vendor pitching AI and performance. Does your AI suggest a rating? If the answer is yes, I'd say walk away. That is illegal exposure alone should disqualify it. I think we can already see what's happening in the market on the ATS front, the applicant tracking system. Massive funded, VC funded, Silicon Valley funded AI native ATS systems are coming in, and immediately lawsuits took place. This is where you'll start to see how, the government and, regulatory agencies will view it. There are real issues with AI. It is still not perfect. It's good, but it should not be the one driving true decision making off very, very sensitive things like performance and compensation. This is the slide that I really wanted to reference because I feel many webinars, us included, don't really cover, but it's extremely important. When you run more review types, you generate more signal, right? And that's good. But more signal without normalization is that just becomes more noise, right? So without calibration, manager A can grade easy, manager B is grades a little bit harsher, and the same performer may get a 3 on one team and a 5 on another. And your pay equity defensibility is zero. With calibration, shared context, distribution, visibility, having more structured talent discussions, documented rationale, that's what all HR leaders want. So here's what I tell any HR leader. If you can't produce a written calibration rationale for every promotion and every pay decision, you have legal exposure. Pay equity audits, EEOC investigations, union grievances for some frontline workforces, they all start with show me how you decided. If the answer starts with the manager felt strongly or we felt, you're in trouble. Calibration isn't a nice to have anymore. In 2026, with pay transparency laws expanding in several states such as California, New York, Colorado, Washington, Illinois now, I believe, it's becoming table stakes. These are some of the lines that I like folks to remember from today. Documentation theater is what happens when the review gets completed, stored, and forgotten. Boxes checked, ratings recorded, nothing changes. As the example I hold out when I was on the plane yesterday, that partner finished 10 reviews, took them, and just saved them in the Dropbox and closed their laptop. Nothing really changed. Most performance management is documentation theater. The reviews happen and they get filed. 90 days later, nobody can remember what was discussed or what were the key takeaways. If you can ask your manager what changed after you provided your reviews, many of them will shrug their shoulders. No one really knows what was committed to or what action followed. The fix isn't more documentation and more reviews and more one-on-ones. It's making these documentation actions trigger something. So reviews can trigger development plans. Plans trigger learning assignments. Assignments trigger a follow-up. Follow-up feeds the next review and then the next calibration cycle. That feeds the next performance moment. So it's a loop, not exactly an event. When it's a loop, every review compounds, and when it's an event, every review kind of evaporates. So most companies are running events for the sake of running it. We're trying to look at here, and this is a multi-year effort that we're embarking on, is what that loop looks like over the course of connecting these modules in, performance, learning, compensation. These are highly connected workflows for talent management. I want to start calling it talent enhancement. How do we actually make our employees better? If we all know that, as Einstein said, compounding interest is what the seventh greatest wonder in the world or something like that. Um, what about compounding our people, right? So I want to have one more poll question. If you could fix one thing about reviews before year end, what would they be? What would it be? Great. So, interestingly enough, we usually get better manager follow through is the top answer. Um, Frankly, there's no software solution that's going to solve that. That's a system problem. Um, that's that's disguised as a people problem, frankly. And you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't make it drink, right? So we all understand that managers and your different organ and different departments, sales, marketing, whoever are focused on that job and not exactly thinking about their employees every single day like HR is, how to upskill their workforce in this very transformative age. So what we try to do here on the manager follow through is just trigger a significant amount of notifications and try to hit them in their flow of work, whether that's Slack or Teams. I'm seeing earlier performance intervention and stronger development problem. So that's the gap between reviews, and that's where the check-in and PIP and IDP flow can really assist. IDPs are the highest leverage, lowest utilization tool in HR. With that being said, I think we can close this poll, and I'll stop sharing my screen because I'd like to maybe show you a little bit more about our platform. Again, it's not going to be consummate. There's too much going on in our platform to do in, 10 to 15 minutes, as I'd like to have some time for Q&A at the end. But I will log into our account here and walk you through how we do some items that we discussed. I hope you all can see my screen. So as you see here, I'm logged in as Michael Thompson. I am, well, for the staging account for our demo purposes, the CEO and HR super admin, as well as has a reporting relationship to make things look easy for us here. But we know that managers and employees aren't logging into performance platforms or our mini HRS, like we like to call it, every single day, like HR is. So we really value this portal right over here. You can see the tasks that are available to you, and we've decided, these are some good items to show and surface in front of a manager as they log in. So what do we want to do? We want to get them right in the flow so they're able to go quickly, figure out and complete their manager reviews, surveys, IDPs, PIPs, or whatever assignments that are there. Again, this is not requiring you to join our platform to go into it. This can be triggered in notifications via Slack and Teams, and of course via email, whatever you use, Outlook, Gmail. But more importantly, is having role-based access control. Managers should be able to look at their teams, understand who is part of their team as their reviews. What is the goal progress, trend line across performance, different cycles? In this organization, we created this team and then unit. And here, it may be more valuable for a VP or a senior general manager of a region looking at performance reviews across different segments within their organization, progress across teams, review progress, some high-level feedback activity across different types of reviews, 360s, standard. And then, of course, for many folks like you that would be HR super admins or executives, is having a more consummate organizational overview and more strategic than, what is your review progress. Here you can see some high-level things such as ENPS sentiment that comes via surveys and, items that are highly related to succession planning and knowing where your critical gaps are in your 9 box. Understanding where competency gaps exist. One thing that we're seeing a lot in the market here is discussion about skills, right? Especially because of what AI is doing. These skills are constantly changing. Every new model that Claude or OpenAI or ChatGPT releases. So having an understanding of where your competencies are, and one thing we're going to be working on internally here is creating, instead of competency gap analysis, is skill gaps analysis. Then, of course, we have the executive overview. This is for your CEOs or management that want to come in instead of they're always hawking down HR on what's the status of this and that, and HR is always playing on the back foot trying to get this information to management or their board if that's required. Here they have it all there. One thing that we likely won't get into this demo is you have your dashboards and reports, and you can also create custom reports with any field or dimensions that you'd like. You could be able to send this off, and for an example that we know is you can take it off and send it to your board deck for ESG slides or understanding your workforce better. Very important for HR is, again, this is the employee profile. Now, this is you or the HR super admin, but more importantly, being able to go into any employee and kind of get an overview of their participation and goals, review cycle histories, check-ins, competencies, areas of improvement, all in one place for a singular employee. That is something that our core offers, right? Our workforce and organization segments really set us differently than the rest of the market because we do care about your organization structure because we have a compensation component, as we all know, when you're doing job grade and grade evaluation and all of those components for compensation. This is very important to understand and rate the job. Of course, here we have an org chart that's more people-based, understanding who's leading who, but we like using the org structure, who's the unit heads. And this really will drive the secondary component here, which is only available for HR super admins, is your access management. Who gets to view what? What we like to say is we have this enterprise level configurability. We have standard roles that everyone gets put into based on our onboarding. But of course, if you need to create a new role or you have some enterprise level configurability, you can really configure access to HRBPs, however the way you want to do it. Of course, we have notifications and all the types of communications that exist for different types, whether it's surveys being sent out or people are delayed on their reviews, nudging. This is all that sits here with templates, triggers, logs, and you can create your own notification if you'd like. Of course, we have other technical components like our integrations. Like we like to sit on top of HRIS or payroll systems. That's how we usually get the organizational data. And we integrate with all major payroll and HRIS systems. But what we're all here for is understanding the cycle. Now it's moving slow. Maybe while that's there, we can kind of look at what's going on here. And here you see there's an HR manager view. In this HR manager view, they can look at the cycle, understand exactly what's taking place in real time. They can come in and review what's going on in these units, have a status review, again, in real time of what's pending and what's completed. But moving on to the manager, this is what a manager would likely see. So they would be able to know exactly what's there, as well as that's linked to the portal that you saw on the homepage, and they can go to their reviews. Over here, you can see some obviously demo information about what are certain elements and competencies that you've defined, and the manager being able to figure it out. I have submitted this and it's been near approval, so it's hard to change. But one thing I would like to share is the AI performance summary. So this takes all the linked reviews, which we can show in when we're creating a cycle, and allows you to have a pretty consummate understanding of what's taken place in your organization. So this allows for non-recency bias. This allows you to make sure that things that happen in February are not lost when, it starts in November or December. They can also, and this is for the employee's benefit too. So the employee can make sure that, what the wins and the successes they've had are not, being driven by recency bias as well. So this is a win-win for all parties involved. Again, this is just pulling context together. So it's not driving a decision for you. It's not telling you what to rate somebody, but this is just an important feature that we thought was our first AI feature for performance management. This is something that's very important. Of course, we always have the ability for it to write. This has been submitted already, but we don't want AI writing reviews for people or, people just putting bullet points and then allowing, Gemini to go off with it. But what we allow is after a certain threshold of words, this is 12 to 15 words in a review, then you can refine that with AI and, be able to discuss that with the AI and say, hey, I would like to make this more harsh. I'd like to make this more pointed. I'd like to make this more leadership oriented. These are things that you'll be able to do with some of our AI capabilities. What you'll see here in this case, these are linked reviews. There's nothing for this person in this case. But when you create a cycle, now this is a perfect segue. This is how you can pull context together. This is back-end stuff that drives compounding performance growth and talent development within your organization. So when I have your standard review cycle over here, you can name your cycle, view. You can put a description here, of course. And here is it's about the rules, how you want your organization to do it. And this is based on your philosophy. So for example, some people like to have it sequentially, where the employee has to complete it first, or they can be done parallel. So the manager can submit their review for the employee before the employee has done their self-assessment. Of course, we allow for it managers to being able to hide that from hide that from their manager until after delivery, so they're not biased by anything that the employee is saying. Can HR be able to see everything in real time as it's getting closer to completion? It's an example of some of the configurability we have in creating a review cycle. And of course, we have our dates here, how everything is going to flow. So you have structure. And this is highly coordinated with the notification component that you saw in our core. This allows, you to set it and forget it. Not that we want you to do that, but, for example, November, you can create in your first couple weeks your cycle and wait for it to launch. All your dates are set, and all you have to come back and do is launch your cycle. And after you launch your cycle, you can just keep track of what's going on and actually start focusing on strategy versus administrative and chasing down managers person by person, with, whether in person or via Slack or Teams, that you have to do. And this is sort of our notification cadence. We like to keep it simple because we don't think HR wants to, have notifications for each little thing and know like, oh, this one I want 1 day, this one I want for 2 days. So here we keep it pretty simple. And the most important part, as we talk about context and signals and a lot of these new AI jargons that are coming out, is being able to link this to other reviews. So, for example, in some of our organizations, some of the organizations we partner with, we allow for it to be, or we want people to have 360 reviews so they understand, the 360 view of their manager. Are they a good manager? And when that review comes and wraps up, you can go create your standard review cycle and where you'll have your year-end review so that when that managers or skip level managers reviewing their direct report, they get to see everything involved. So they know exactly what's allowed, what the manager's reportees have said about that manager that reports to the skip level. I know that was a little confusing the way I explained it, but basically you just are bringing in additional pieces of context. Of course, kudos and recognition are not cycles, but that also gets pulled in as context. So when the manager is reviewing somebody, they get to see all the wins from either their own other peers, right? So this can be cross-functional, and that's important too, right? Because now with the walls being dropped between functions with what AI is doing to organizations, we need to have more cross-functional ability to get an understanding of an organization. Of course, one of the most important parts is linking goals, right? So if some of our organizations are not tech companies that do very descriptive OKRs and might have their own software, having goals and understanding, hey, this is what our organizational goal is, and then cascading it down the organization, being able to see that as it's relevant to that employee, how have they succeeded? Of course, now you have your rating scale, right? So are you a four-star rating scale or a 4 or 5 star rating scale? And of course, we allow for you to have it, numerically or in a definition, right? So you can call it and you call it by rating titles. So your typical meets expectations, exceeds expectations, however you define it internally as part of your philosophy. Here is where we think we really stand out for the middle market solutions in performance management is the depth of our calibration workflow. So we create calibration typically how an organization does it, right? Managers submit their ratings, and once managers submit those ratings, typically, we heard on one prospect call is, it's hours that they sit on a Zoom call and people fight for their champions because they're across regions. They're, a large petrochemical company. And in this case, we will allow you to have a method to have all of your context in one place, and I'll show you this exactly right over here. Within your calibration sessions, you can create multiple sessions. Of course, you'll have your engineering team, your marketing team, all that have different philosophies and different things that has to be the output based on certain definitions that you saw earlier in our cycle creation. But when you're having this here, you have your set of your employees, right? And right over here, you can see some AI alerts that's generated. These AI alerts are specific to the employee, and it can just surface, gender biases, some strong language that perhaps might have some, undertones that you would want to, interdict beforehand. Again, this is not telling you this person is certain thing. It is that it is allowing HR and the managers to maybe get interdict beforehand, have a coaching conversation with that manager before things are finalized. And this is an example of how you can, get ahead of it, be proactive before something happens that, again, it falls on HR's shoulder. And an example of this is what are some bias-free rewrites based on some of the language? This is, again, we always say it's AI-assisted analysis. Human review is required. And what are some recommended actions that can come from this? This is all trained on HR scholarship and real-world evidence, right? So this is not just ChatGPT generating something for you based on nothing and just taking a few words. It's based on, decades of HR scholarship from, leading institutions and research. So this is for the employee, but for your calibrators, in this case, me, Michael Thompson, my persona here, you can also see like how has this person rated across their reportees, right? So is there a gender bias in this case? And what is the recommendation for this? Can this person be enrolled in unconscious bias training? It's a little bit it's a sensitive topic, of course, but we have, of course, a content marketplace as part of our broader Trainery HCM organization. So when you see this, you can immediately go to a learning plan and go purchase the course seamlessly and add it as part of the learning plan and tie it to an IDP as well. So that was our calibration side as well. But going back to actually the standard cycle, we saw calibration where you set thresholds, of course, and you can have DEI insights as part of that in the reporting in the calibration session and your authority model. This is not, it looks complex, but in reality, it is just about aligning. Could you have managers that can override, or is it hierarchical? So in the hierarchies, this is pretty important for larger enterprise organizations, but we've seen it in tech companies that they want managers to be far more empowered and really drive the progression of the organization. So they allow manager vetoes and then calibration to be manager driven. Of course, here you have your approval, who is the person that says this is signed, sealed, and delivered, pun intended. But here is where we also think that we, for a middle market solution, create structured flexibility. How you rate leadership is going to be different sorry, how you rate your marketing team and the competencies and elements that are composed of that is fundamentally different than your sales team. Within that, so one thing that we're rolling out in the next week is grade adjusted competency and element libraries. So, and this is driven by one of our potential partners that we're, trying to, work with is your VP of a region is leadership is different than to him and what he's evaluated on than it is for your manager that has five reports or five reportees that will work for him. The regional manager that, or head of North America that probably has 500 employees maybe working under him. Leadership is completely different. So the competencies, the elements that make up that competency is different. So being able to seamlessly look at that in a matrix table is something that we're rolling on the next week, and we'll be happy to show you once that comes out. But allowing to have different templates to different groups in one seamless workflow, not having to have seven different cycles because you know that your marketing team is different than your corporate function. That is something that we really endorse as well. I want to give a couple minutes for Q&A at the end, of course, but of course we have our performance side that we walk through, and here in our manager persona, as you saw, it's a little bit different. And here's the employee persona that you can see it's very simple. They get to come in and just do what they're meant to do, and they have an overall view, pulling in context that's relevant to them. In this manager view, you can see that this is the process, review, calibration. You approve that, and then you deliver it. When you deliver it, doesn't end there, right? So when you have your delivery, go to a cycle that has something, you can have your schedule your conversation, but it goes to your calendar. You can generate an agenda for your one-on-one. And once you create that one-on-one, you can go to your check-ins and you'll see what your one-on-one check-ins have. So this is an example of us trying to implement having it in one connected workflow, right? Having all performance context in one place. I just want to show that we don't have any feature gating. We believe these are all connected components together. So as it relates to performance, so you can see that we offer surveys as well. You have your typical onboarding, engagement, pulse, or exit surveys, and as well as recognitions. And this is part of phase 1 and 2. When you go to phase 3, this is where we think we can do some great work together, is succession planning, looking at where you have critical role gaps. Do you have an attrition risk based on anonymized survey data, for example? I know I wanted to give more minutes for free time. So I will stop sharing my screen and open up for any Q&A from the folks we have.
Hello, Satish. We have few questions in the webinar chat. Maybe you can look
Yeah,
at
I think I'm
that.
just looking to see. Is this the one that you sent over? How do we avoid overwhelming managers with too many review types? You sent
Yeah.
it over? Oh, yes. Okay. So yeah, overwhelming managers is something that we do want to avoid. We want them to do what their day job is, but the goal is to create structure behind that, right? So it's not necessarily about having a review every week or something like that, but as a structure that becomes a flywheel, right? So then they start building it into their flow of work. I see another question here is what is typically the format for one-on-ones? What questions would you recommend asking? So one-on-ones can take many forms. There's your very ad hoc one-on-ones, which we support, which is by your managers that are enabled, right? So these managers can come in and just have a quick check-in. Hey, how are you feeling? Right. And this is where they can have more substantive discussions. One thing that we're rolling out in the next couple of weeks is having tags for these one-on-ones, right? So this is a career planning discussion, right? This is about your future at this company. This is where it's like, hey, you feel disengaged. This is about how do we re-engage you? So these questions is the answer is the questions that we recommend asking is dependent on the type of one-on-one you want. So when we create our check-in cycle, which is essentially the organizational philosophy, saying, hey, we want people meeting every week or every other week or every month, however you decide that is most optimal for your organization. The format of those one-on-ones should be employee based, right? So looking at and very personalized questions that they should be asking are related to what HR really cares about is engagement, right? Are we making sure that we're investing in the right tools for you? That's something that I think is very important, which is why we've seen the rise of total reward statements. So employers can show that they are investing in the employees, growth at that company. There's a little bit of a winding answer, but basically, it's very dependent on the manager, right? This is a case where I wouldn't say HR should be driving this conversation. This should be bubbling up, right? This should be a bottoms up approach, hearing and that's why access is important. HR will be able to go see what certain things are. Of course, we have private notes that no one can see for managers and employees to, keep track of certain things that they want, reflected personally. But, that should be bottoms up, right? So, employees and managers should be able to track that context and say, hey, we are noticing these gaps. This is where we'll do a quick pulse survey, and then we'll see if we can rectify these things, and then keep track of those outcomes. So another question here. This is, can PerformSpark coexist with our HRIS? Yes, of course. We integrate with all the major HRIS platforms such as payroll, your Paycom's, UKGs, ADPs, as well as Bamboo, Workday, all of the sorts. See also how does a system identify a manager bias? So I can have some of our developers send you the entire documentation behind it, but basically it's taking a series of factors and using research from top institutions and HR leadership institutes to kind of derive what is language or something that can be derived as can be accepted as bias. In this case, we know that, for example, people can write certain words or view certain demographic groups and write it in a way that comes off as biased, right? And to just interdict beforehand, it's not prescribing saying this person is X, Y, and Z. It's saying, hey, this is something that can be dealt with before it becomes a real problem. And really looking at that at an org-wide level, right? If you don't want to have we have a lot of mathematics behind and distribution variance and all, but basically, if there is a statistically significant gap between maybe how men and women are in a certain unit or department are rated, this is something HR should be aware of. Is there something that HR needs to do? More training, more specific conferences they get sent to. This allows you to have, again, a continuous compounding flywheel of talent enhancement. Maybe the last one is, how do you ensure reviews actually lead to development action? You can't ensure, and you can bring the horse to the water, but what you can do is give them the tools and the support that do lead to that, right? So when you finish and deliver the review, do you schedule that one-on-one conversation, and then maybe perhaps create IDPs for maybe everybody, right? Even your star salesman, your star developer has areas they can improve on, maybe in leadership skills as they move up the organization. As well as underperformance with PIPs, tying it with the learning that is going on. We of course have our own LMS, but bringing in learning context and being able to say these are the courses or the things that need to be generated. This is how you create a compounded talent flywheel. I think we're well over time, but I think that's all we'll have today. Thank you all for joining us. We will send this recording and the presentation over to you all in the next few days. But again, if there's anything that you'd like to specifically get into in our platform, we just scratched the surface here. Feel free to book a demo with me or email me, and we can discuss all these things. And of course, if you guys want to copy notes or share notes with each other with me, and so I can learn more about what on the ground HR leaders are facing day to day, happy to do that as well. But either way, I will let you get on with the rest of your day. Thank you all for joining us, and look forward to connecting in the future. You can always come at info@performspark.ai or the Trainery HCM website. Thank you all.